Alright, I'm back, guys. Obviously, starting from the bottom as usual. Um, I'm pairing this article, like I have been doing, with this one. Hello? Oh, sorry. This one is a lot more positive, and it's a bit of a palate cleanser. Yeah, something positive. Unfortunately, it's few and far in between, guys. Alright, here we go. I've been trying to read this for a while, but just kept getting distracted by shit. Alright. The DC Department of Human Services on September 24th informed the LGBT Community Services Center, Casa Ruby, that it will not renew its annual $850,000 grant that, among other things, funds Casa Ruby's emergency low barrier shelter for homeless LGBTQ youth and adults. Casa Ruby founder and CEO Ruby Corrado said DHS informed her of its decision to discontinue the grant less than a week before the end of the current fiscal year, when the funding is set to expire, which could result in the shutdown of the shelter on October 1st. Corrado since has launched a GoFundMe appeal seeking to help the community so that the 50-bed shelter and 24-hour drop-in space located at the Casa Ruby headquarters at 7530 Georgia Avenue might continue to serve LGBTQ people in need of emergency housing. Quote, after 9 years of serving thousands of homeless LGBTQ youth and adults, we are forced to close the doors to our most important program at Casa Ruby. Our low barrier housing on October 1st, 2021, Corrado states in her GoFundMe appeal. Quote, this is also a terrible loss of 30 jobs that will impact the lives of trans and gender non-binary and other employees who may now face who may face homelessness themselves. A horrible tragedy, the GoFundMe appeal states. Corrado told the newspaper called the Washington Blade on Monday that she and the Casa Ruby staff were hopeful but uncertain that whether the emergency contributions from members of the community might be able to prevent a complete shutdown of the shelter. Quote, we appreciate the work that Casa Ruby has done to serve homeless youth in the District of Columbia, said DHS Interim Deputy Administrator Sheila Strain Clark in a September 24th letter informing Corrado of the decision to discontinue the funding. Under Article 6A of Grant Agreement, DHS FSA HIRA 00618 LGBTQ Youth Homeless Low Barrier Beds Grant Agreement, DHS at the discretion and subject to the availability of funding, may extend the grant agreement for additional terms, Strain Clark says in her letter, and goes on to say, at this time, DHS has decided not to extend the grant agreement for fiscal year in 2022, she wrote. Strain Clark didn't provide a specific reason for the DHS decision to discontinue the funds in her letter to Corrado. In response to the request for the Blade for the reason why the grant was terminated, a DHS spokesperson sent the Blade a statement from the DHS director Laura Zellinger, commenting on the DHS decision, but also did not provide a specific reason for the funding cutoff. Quote, DHS is committed to the safety and well-being of youth, including LGBT plus youth, who we know disproportionately experience homelessness, Zellinger says in the statement. Quote, we are not decreasing funding for LGBTQ youth services, which will continue to be offered through the continuum of care, the statesman says. Quote, the Covenant House Washington and True Colors will now provide LGBTQ plus youth services, specific services for the youth in the Deanwood community on Ward 7. These are new services in the community, says the statesman. Quote, grant renewal decisions are based on ensuring the accountability and continuity of quality services and the safety of our residents, the statement says, and goes on to say, we value the community organizations who deliver these services and honor the contributions of Casa Ruby. The decision by DHS to discontinue the Casa Ruby Homeless Shelter grant came just under 6 months after Casa Ruby filed an administrative complaint against DHS, changing the DC government agency with ignoring and failing to stop one of its high level officials from allegedly engaging in anti transgender discrimination and retaliation against Casarubi. The 6-page complaint, which was prepared by Casarubi's attorney and signed by Corrado, says the DHS official in question, whose name is redacted from the publicly released copy of the complaint, had acted in an abusive and discriminatory way toward Corrado and other Casarubi employees. It says the targeted employees were overseeing 3 DHS grants awarded to Casarubi that funded shelters providing emergency housing for LGBTQ people. Uh, DHS has decided to comment. Oh, sorry. DHS has declined to comment on the complaint, saying it was investigating its allegations. Yeah, sure. We'll get back to you after you have a cigarette, right? Just, if you know what I mean. Jeez. Corrado told The Blade at the time Casarubi announced it had filed the complaint that the DHS official's name in the complaint appeared to be retaliation against Casarubi, among other reasons, for a decision by Corrado to decline a request by DHS that Casarubi move its main homeless shelter to sit on Division Avenue in Northeast DC. Corrado said she believes the location would be unsafe for Casarubi transgender youth clients. Corrado points out that the location to which the DHS officials wanted the Casarubi shelter to move was near the site on Division Avenue, where transgender woman Deniquia, or Dee Dee Dobbs, 22, was shot to death during a July 4th, 2016 armed robbery in which DC police said a group of male suspects were targeting transgender women. Corrado said that as of Tuesday, members of the community and supporters had contributed about $75,000 through the GoFundMe appeal, raising hope that an immediate shutdown of the shelter could be averted. Well, that's depressing. And of course, they're being placed in an environment that would social engineer them out of society without officials having to really do it themselves. This is kind of the oldest trick that society seems to do. You know, you just put people in the outskirts or somewhere in a sketchy location and, you know, see what happens without the frustration that they have. It really sucks. Obviously, it seems a little eugenic, but it's vaguely so. Alright. And this is a positive spin on this side of things. DC will open its first homeless shelter for LGBTQ plus youth adults this summer. I actually did not do further research after this is claiming it was opening. I'm assuming it is. There's just, I can't get too much into the weeds. If you guys know what happened, please tell me. Okay. DC will have its first homeless shelter serving LGBTQ adults in August, when a 40-bed emergency shelter intended for queer people 25 years older opens at 450th Street. Man, I suck with abbreviations. Alright. The city decided to dedicate a space for the LGBT community so people could receive tailored services. Officials with Mayor Muriel Bowser's administration said at a ribbon-cutting ceremony on Thursday. The goal is to offer a more comfortable place of respite to queer people who are more likely to have a history of trauma or are more vulnerable to violence in existing homeless shelters. Quote, people experience homelessness differently, for different reasons and in different ways. People avoid homeless shelters also for a multitude of reasons, Bowser said at the ceremony outside of the facility. Quote, we know, we have seen it in the creation of our small, dignified family shelters that when we get shelter right, people will come into the shelter. The mayor's team has taken steps to improve the city's shelter, including replacing DC General with smaller family shelters in each ward, and more recently, renovating the 801 East Men's Shelter. While the city has multiple emergency or transitional housing options for homeless youth who are LGBTQ, there are currently no options for people 25 and older despite a significant need. Approximately 7% of adults experiencing homelessness in the city uh, homeless city shelter system are LGBTQ, while 18% of adults experience homelessness who are unsheltered are LGBTQ, based on point-in-time count data represented by Department of Human Services, directed by Laura Green Zellinger. She also said 20% of the entire LGBTQ population in the shelter system report a history of domestic violence. The staff at the new shelter will provide trauma informed care and connect people to additional treatment, improving opportunities and other resources, Zellinger added. In keeping with the mayor's promise to eliminate homelessness, they will also try to link people to permanent housing. The shelter represents a milestone for LGBTQ plus advocates who had long called on city officials to provide this resource. Last year, the Bowser administration announced their goal to quote, create dedicated shelter programming for LGBTQ adults to ensure people have choice and feel safe accessing emergency shelter, end quote, as a part of the Homeward DC 2.0 plan to address homelessness. Quote, a significant date that brought us to this day is June 13th, 2019. That was the day that Zoe Spears, a 23-year-old trans woman who was experiencing homelessness, was shot and killed, said Zellinger, who said she learned of this from community advocates. Quote, this happened a short time after Ashanti Carmen, another trans woman, was killed in March of 2019. The district was forced with the reality of the trauma that this community encounters, a trauma that is only compounded by homelessness. Quote, we must remember the lives lost while we think of the essential services that we will offer, Zellinger continued, so that that kind of violence and vulnerability can be something of our past. The Bowser administration leveraged a federal grant from the American Rescue Plan Act to convert the former shelter for families experiencing homelessness in Marshall Heights into this facility serving LGBTQ adults. Officials opted to use the space differently because the number of families experiencing homelessness has decreased per latest surveying. I hope that's good, since people sometimes opt out of telling truth or feel pressured not to survey in a specific way. Alright. Our long-time transgender rights activist in attendance, Erline Budd, flagged the need for further community engagement. Given she only heard of the shelter's opening the night before, while she said she's pleased about the opening, she's also concerned about the security and that there are too few beds. Quote, please make sure it's fair and equitable, because every time we open something like this, transgenders end up being the least housed in these programs, said Budd. Kimberly Bush, the executive director of DC Center for LGBTQ Community, meanwhile called the opening monumental, and also, quote, it's 40 more beds than what we had the day before, and that's how I look at it, Bush told DCist slash WAMU. Kate Coventry of the DC Fiscal Police Institute Policy Institute, who is also a member of the city's Interagency Council on Homelessness, said the new shelter will provide a test case for how much need there is for a facility like this. It's hard to know how many people will choose to stay at a shelter, she said. But it's turning people away because at its capacity there will be telling. That will be telling. Quote, it's always easier to expand once you show there is demand, Coventry told DCist. And that's probably the only positive story we're going to hear for a while. Actually, that's not true. I will return to the positive later, though. Alright. So, this is good, but also bad. Texas Child Welfare Agency blocked from investigating many more parents of trans teens. So, even though this attack was blocked, you can't see this as not. You should still see this as attempted assault just looming over, waiting to come down again. you can't see this necessarily as a victory because this type of institutional thinking is still here. Again, the evil, the people that want us dead, it's few and far in between. There's a majority of people that are good and well intentioned. So we can't let this bring our hopes down, but we cannot see this as a victory. Okay. Texas Child Welfare Agency is once blocked from investigating parents who provide gender affirming care to their transgender children. The injunction applies to any family that belongs to PFLAG, an LGBTQ advocacy group with more than 600 members in Texas. The injunction also specifically protects a handful of families named in the suit, including the Brickles, outspoken advocates for transgender youth who were among the first to be investigated under this directive. This is the latest chapter in the months-long legal battle over whether providing medically indicated gender-affirming healthcare under the guidance of a doctor could result in the finding of child abuse by the state. In February, following a non-binding legal opinion from Attorney General Ken Paxton, Governor Greg Abbott directed the Department of Family and Protective Services to investigate parents who provide gender-affirming care to their transgender children. The Texas Supreme Court has ruled that Abbott had no grounds to direct DFPS to investigate their families, but overturned a statewide injunction on procedural grounds. The American Civil Liberties Union and Lambda began brought under another lawsuit after that first injunction was overturned. Seeking protections on behalf of all members of PFLAG, Travis County District Judge Amy Clark Meacham granted that injunction Friday, 3 months after hearing arguments. Quote, the court has grasped the magnitude and breadth of this continued harm that Governor Abbott directive and Attorney General Paxton's opinion would have caused if DFPS was allowed to pursue its investigations, said Nicholas Gulori, a lawyer with Lambda Legal. The lawsuit, filed in June, outlined examples of that harm, including the story of one 16-year-old transgender boy who attempted suicide the day the governor issued his directive. Quote, he said that the political environment, including Abbott's letter and being misgendered at school, led him to take these actions, the lawsuit said. The the outpatient psychiatric facility where the young man sought care later reported his parents were providing him with gender-affirming care. Paxton's office did not immediately respond to the request for comment. Of course not. Alright. Alright, guys. And it only gets worse. But again, this you'll have to know in the future, this is not about kids anymore. This really never was. Alright. Mississippi enacts ban on transgender affirming care for transgender minors. Transgender minors in Mississippi can no longer receive gender affirming care in the state after its Republican governor signed a bill Tuesday that prohibits healthcare professionals from providing both hormone treatment and surgical procedures. Okay, so this is a little misleading because minor doesn't mean younger children. This is actually against the medical guidelines, actually. So I feel like it's just trying to speak to people who just hear youth and just think like under 30 or something. Like, but yeah. Okay. Governor Tate Reeves' approval of HB 1125 comes as Republican-led states around the country are pushing an unprecedented number of bills seeking to restrict gender-affirming care this year. Debates around the issue have reached into new territory in recent months after some lawmakers proposed measures that would extend some of the bans to people older than 18. Again, you have seen this is not about children. Gender-affirming care is medically necessary. Evidence-based care that uses a multidisciplinary approach to help a person transition from their assigned gender, the one that was designated at birth, to their affirmed gender, the gender by which one wants to be known. Mississippi's ban, which went into effect immediately after Reeves signed it, outlaws the prescription and administration of puberty-blocking medication and cross-sex hormone therapy in patients under the age of 18, and prohibits surgery related to gender transition, which children do not do anyways. So, I feel like the word youth and minor is a little wishy-washy here and makes me a little uncomfortable because I can see the opposition seeing this just as a euphemism for, like, pretty young people, um, which it's not meaning to be. Like, an 80-year-old can say a minor or a youth and mean somebody in their 20s. So, oh, sorry, youth could just mean 20s, not minor. Sorry, that's a lawful term. Meanwhile, youth is not, for the most part. Okay. The law also makes it illegal for people to, quote, knowingly engage in contact, aids, or abets the performance or inducement of gender transition procedures to minors, which they don't. Okay. Any healthcare professionals found to be in violation of the ban will have their license to practice medicine in the state revoked, according to the law, which also gives people who, quote, assert an actual or threatened violation of the ban right to bring civil suits against any facility, individual, or entity for violating its provisions. The statute of limitations for bringing such suits in 30 years. At the end of the day, quote, at the end of the day, there are two positions here. One tells children that they are beautiful the way they are, that they can find happiness in their own bodies. The other tells them that they should take drugs and cut themselves up with expensive surgeries in order to find freedom from depression. I know which side I'm on, Reeves said in a statement on Tuesday. Ah, man. That sounds insane. That dichotomy, at least. Major medical associations agree that gender affirming care is clinically appropriate for children and adults with gender dysphoria, which, according to the American Psychiatrical Association, is psychological distress that may result from a person's gender identity and sex assignment at birth do not align. Though the care is highly individualized, some children may decide to use reversible puberty suppression therapy. This part of the process may also include hormone therapy that can lead to gender affirming physical change. Surgical interventions, however, are not typically done on children, and many healthcare providers do not offer them to minors. Okay, so I feel like when people hear transitioning, they just think of the surgeries and not the social, which people do first. Like, it's a very strict process. LGBTQ advocates have long stressed that access to gender affirming care is life-saving health care, and is of critical importance to a group that suffers from uniquely high rates of suicide. A 2022 research brief from the Trevor Project, a nonprofit that works to prevent suicide among LGBT youth, noted that, quote, pubertal suppression is associated with decreased behavioral and emotional problems as well as decreased depressive symptoms, end quote. The group blasted Reeves' decision to sign the bill on Tuesday, with Casey Safradini, its vice president of advocacy and government affairs, saying in a statement that, quote, decisions around medical care should be made between parents, patients, and doctors, not the politicians. Earlier this month, South Dakota enacted a similar healthcare ban, and Utah put one on its books in January. Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas also enacted bans of gender-affirming care in recent years, though two of them have been temporarily blocked by federal courts. Alright, I'm gonna make this a part 2, guys. I will be back.